Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Believe it or not, we've gotten through the meat and potatoes of Browns camp. I mean, basically, the next hurdle ahead for this team is the final preseason game, a meaningful hurdle, right? Because this preseason game they're coming up, yeah, we're going to get a look at Dylan Gabriel. That's going to be important. But as far as like the starting unit of this football team, the majority of guys who are going to play week one, those guys were worried about the joint practice. There's going to be this week of practice where they're actually going to be game planning, installing stuff, and then they're going to execute that in the first quarter of this game, and then we're off to Cincinnati. So the meat and potatoes of Browns training camp, we're through it. And we've learned a lot throughout Browns training camp, right? They've had 2 joint practices. This camp, more than any other camp, has been physical, right? Padded practices almost every day, no breaks. Kevin Stefanski's practices were heavily criticized before for being very, very lacking in physicality. They would only have padded practices about half the time during training camp. They would never have tackle to the ground scenarios. They would not really go live very often. This has been very different. This camp has been almost an 100% flip of that style. And I think that's the first thing that we've learned. This emphasis on intensity, this emphasis on physicality, this training camp, I hope it's here to stay, because you can just tell it's been much better for this football team overall. You can tell from how they performed in the first preseason game, how much more prepared they looked, how they've been able to meet the challenge of going up to joint practice against the defending champs. And, you know, debatably, people are saying they won both days, right? Now, again, nobody wins a practice. All of that can be said. You can debate about who won the practice, who didn't, right? That's very subjective. But the fact is that there are people on both sides that consider that the Browns had a good showing at joint practice at the very least. And that has not always been the case. It seems like every time these joint practices have come up, it's caught the Browns by surprise, the ramp up in physicality. Now, we still have to see if this translates into anything tangible when we watch them finally on Sundays. But what we can say is that throughout this camp, you felt much better. You've heard much better things when they've gone up against other teams, and seen much better things when they did go up against another team in Carolina in the preseason game, that you feel a lot better about that approach. I've been heavily critical of Kevin's style here. He's never going to be heavy play guys in the preseason. But you know what? You played starters in both joint practices. That's essentially to them preseason reps, right? You've been doing tackle to the ground, physical practices at camp all year. I can respect that. And then you're going to play them in the final preseason game. That's all confirmed. I can respect that, right? Like, this approach throughout camp is a respectable approach throughout camp. And I hope that they maintain this. And also keep note, yes, the Browns have dealt with injuries, but these injuries have not been related to tackling or physicality in practice. A lot of these injuries are honestly pretty random, right? Even the injuries to the quarterbacks, both those guys injured their hamstrings running, not really getting tackled. Shedeur Sanders has hurt his shoulder and his oblique throwing the ball before and after practice, right? So this increased physicality has not been a detriment in terms of injury. It's something that seems to have the offensive line more prepared, the defensive line more prepared, and overall seems like a good thing. When I'm critical about somebody and I'm critical about something, especially when it comes to the Browns, I will bang on that nail as long as I think it needs to be banged on. Sometimes I become exhausting, right? Because I'm going to keep hammering on that nail because I'm like, that's a problem. That's a problem, right? But when you actually fix the problem, I'm going to give you praise for it, right? Because that's what I care about. And I know problems are going to exist on a football team. I know problems are going to arise. That's normal. How you go about solving those problems, that's what I like to judge. And I like that the Browns solved the problem, and it's showing some results. So good on them. So that's the first thing I think we've learned from joint practice and just Browns camp overall. The emphasis on physicality is a good thing in football. I know it's a crazy idea, but maybe having just a little bit more of a physical camp was a good thing. The next thing I think we've learned is there's been a lot of questions about this offensive line. They have not had a shining last couple of years. There have been some moments where the idea of the Browns offensive line the reality of it hasn't lived up to it. And a lot of folks were wondering, including myself, was a simple switch back to a more familiar style going to be all it took for this offensive line to be good again? I was very skeptical of the idea. You moved a couple pieces here and there, but all in all, this is pretty much the same offensive line you had last year, right? DeJuan Jones playing left tackle, that's new, but Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller, Ethan Pulsic, Joe Bitonio, that's the same unit that's been here for a very long time. It seems like throughout joint practice, the offensive line has held up well. And again, they're going up against monsters in Philadelphia. It's one of the best defensive lines in all of football. To hear that offensive line was not imploding during that practice, while the Browns' defensive line, which I'm going to talk to, was absolutely getting to Jalen Hurts. It's a massively good sign, right? This offensive line is going to be the engine of the offense because the Browns are going to run the ball a lot, and whenever they pass the ball, they're going to need time, right? They don't have the best wide receivers in the world. They're relying on a lot of tight ends, bigger guys who take longer to get in and out their breaks. They're going to need good offensive line play and pass protection to be able to do what they want to do. And they're going to need, obviously, good offensive line play and run blocking to be able to do what they want to do, starting 2 rookie running backs. A lot of this, and Jerome Ford is not somebody who's going to create on his own. He's somebody who also needs a good offensive line. The engine of this offense is going to be behind this offensive line. And the good news is it seems like this offensive line is closer to being what they used to be than what they were last year. That the changes that they have made have been successful changes, that they're putting these guys in a position to be successful, and they're looking like they're going to be successful. That's really good news to hear, right? If you're a Browns fan, if you care about how this offense is going to look, if you care about any of these quarterbacks, you should care about this offensive line, right? Because at one point, this core of guys were a part of one of the best offensive lines that we had seen in the last 10 years. Right. I think the only offensive line that really touched what the Browns were doing in 2020 and 2021, especially 2020, where they were just historically great, was like some of those prime Cowboys, Tyron Smith offensive lines back in the day. That's how good this offensive line, this core used to be, right? Obviously, they aren't that good anymore, but they still have that core of players, and they're going to try to give it one more go this season, and that's going to be incredibly important to anything that they want to do. So that's really, really good to hear, right? On top of that, given that the offensive line looks a lot better, well, looks like they're going to be more their old self, it gives me the feeling that, hey, there's some hope that this offense is not going to be a disaster. Now, will they be one of the best offenses in the NFL? Very unlikely. But they have the potential here to not be a disaster. Maybe be better than we think. On top of the offensive line being good, it's been very clear throughout camp that Jerry Jeudy looks the part of a number 1 wide receiver. He has to do it this year again, but he had the season last year. I think he looks good so far throughout camp. He looks like obviously the best guy here, no doubt about it. Able to win when he goes to Philly, able to win when he goes to Carolina, right, in joint practices. He looks like a number 1 receiver. So that's awesome, right? We know what David Njoku can bring on a day in, day out basis. He's one of the best tight ends in all of football, pass blocking, receiving. He's the whole, package there, right? Harold Fannin Jr. looks like he could be that too. He's been somebody who every step of camp, we were at OTA, rookie camp, right? People are like, Harold Fannin looks amazing. Then we go to OTAs. Harold Fannin looks amazing. Then we go to mini camps. Harold Fannin looks amazing. Then we start practice. Harold Fannin looks amazing. We get to padded training camp. Harold Fannin looks amazing. We get to joint practice. Harold Fannin looks amazing. We get to the second joint practice. Harold Fannin looks really good. Consistently hearing good things about a guy in this stage of his development. Now, again, I don't want to give you the impression that he's going to put up, Travis Kelce numbers or anything like that, or like prime Delaney Walker numbers or anything like that. But there is a lot there to suggest that, hey, this young guy looks like he's going to be really good eventually, or at least has everything he needs to be successful in the NFL. On a similar note, well, not on a similar note, but on a better note, you're getting more clarity from the Quincy situation. I still think that there's a chance of a suspension given that situation and how it's played out. But just any clarity at all on what's going to be your number one running back throughout the season, I think is a good thing. Dylan Sampson has showed some in some moments as well. And Jerome Ford, I thought, he's had a pretty nice camp when he's been out there as well. Overall, you got to be very encouraged with what you've seen from these young guys in this draft class. Even when you want to talk about the quarterbacks, I think you've seen some stuff from Dylan Gabriel that's been encouraging. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders has put some stuff out there that's been encouraging as well. And the last thing I think we've learned from joint practice is that this defensive line is going to be as advertised. I think there's a good chance that that's going to happen. Myles Garrett looks better, bigger, stronger, faster than he's ever looked before. I can't explain it. I don't know how he's gotten bigger. I don't know how he's managed to get bigger and faster. And I don't know how he looks better than he already was, given that he was the best defensive player on the planet. But he looks like he got better. Myles Garrett's an alien, freak of nature. He's going to be an alien, freak of nature. And I think the best thing about it is, man, look at the help that Myles Garrett has on this defensive line. This is the first year, I think, in Myles Garrett's career where I think this is going to be a true sentence. Myles Garrett has more help than TJ Watt, right? That's been the big thing with TJ Watt. People bring up his production, but what most people who pay attention understand is that Myles has no help compared to TJ, who's had all the help. But you look at his defensive line, I think this is a year where you can say to yourself, Myles got more help. Mike Hall, hopefully he could build on a really good rookie year, but you got Hargreaves. You got Shelby Harris, right? You got really good defensive tackle play, veteran defensive tackle play on this team. And then you have Isaiah McGuire, who's really good last year. I think Alex Wright's going to be pretty solid for this team. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is going to be fine for this team in a limited role. And then Mason Graham. Look, every single professional defensive lineman that looks at Mason Graham looks at him and says, yeah, that guy's going to be good, right? I've heard Max Crosby say he's watched the tape. He's impressed. We have heard the stories behind the scenes that Myles Garrett was integral in the Browns drafting Mason Graham, that Mason Graham was somebody that Myles Garrett really, really liked the tape of when he sat down and watched guys. The people who are really good watch this dude and say, hey, he's special. Yeah, I know there's a guy on Twitter. He's like a fantasy football guy, and piece of advice, never take actual football advice from fantasy football people. No disrespect if you're a fantasy football guy. It's just the worst takes I've ever heard have been from fantasy football accounts. I don't know why. I have my assumptions on why that happens, but I'm just telling you what I've lived through. The worst takes I've ever heard, especially along the line of scrimmage, are always from fantasy football people. And I know there's a guy who's made it his like whole thing to talk about, Mason Graham not being good. It's ridiculous. Everybody who knows what they're talking about looks at Mason Graham and goes, that's a player right there. And the thing about Mason Graham is that he's looked the part. He's been playing with the starting unit all camp. He's looked the part. He was in Philadelphia for joint practice. And it's worth mentioning, right? I think that's their all-pro center. Not their all-pro center. One of their all-pro guards, right? He didn't practice. So, it's not necessarily like he's just destroying other all-pros, but he's had good reps against an all-pro and Wyatt Teller. He's had good reps against the Philadelphia Eagles in joint practices. Apparently, he was close to unstoppable, as well as Myles Garrett in joint practice. He's looked the part, right? As good as you want a defensive tackle at this stage of his development. And remember, this is one of those positions where the transition time is supposed to be long, right? You're talking about 2-3 year transition time. So you really know what a guy is. The fact that he looks this good this early is an excellent sign for the Cleveland Browns. And I know it's been easy to overshadow the fact that this guy's the 5th overall pick because so much stuff happens around it, because he's not just the 5th overall pick, right? The Browns didn't just have the 5th pick in the draft and took him. I think if that were the case, there'd be more excitement about him. It's the fact that you traded Travis Hunter to the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's also the fact that, Shador Sanders got drafted much later. And that's what a lot of the attention is on. And it kind of reminds me of Joe Thomas in 2007 when he got drafted. Again, I'm not saying Mason Graham's going to be Joe Thomas at his position. If he is, that is a massive, massive home run. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just comparing the dynamic between like when Brady Quinn and Joe Thomas got drafted and how all the hype was around Brady Quinn because he played the sexy position. He was a local guy. There was a lot of hope that he would be the next Bernie Kosar, right? He went to Notre Dame, which is not Miami, but it's Miami adjacent because they're like there was a lot of parallels here to say to yourself, oh, this could be the next Bernie Kosar thing. And we were close enough to the Bernie era to where like a lot of the people who lived through the Bernie era were still like deep in their diehard fandom and projected a lot of that stuff onto Brady Quinn at the time, or at least that's what I experienced. And that caused a lot during training camp. But then as the time went on, right, people started recognizing, hey, Joe Thomas guy has to start, right? It might be that kind of a situation with Mason Graham where it's like, oh, people don't appreciate him now. But I promise you, if he continues to look like this, if he continues on the trajectory that great players have looked at his tape and said that he's on, then the ceiling is the roof for him, right? The Michael Jordan quote. So that's an excellent sign here. And I think overall, you got to look at what we're talking about here. You go through this draft class, and there's a reason to be encouraged about every single selection the Browns have made in this draft class. Outside of Quinshon Judkins, who has not been at practice, but when Quinshon was here for minicamp, there was reason to be excited about him. He looked really good. And, people in the building were comparing him to Nick Chubb, reportedly, right? So he's had his moments. He just hasn't been able to do it in training camp because he's been dealing with a legal situation. But you go through every single one of these picks, and there's a moment for optimism for every single one of them. And that's all you can really ask for right now. We're not going to know if these guys are good for until like we get to 3 years down the line. But the fact that we feel as encouraged as we can feel about this draft class right now is a good thing. And overall, I would say so far, I think the Browns have had a successful camp. It's not the greatest camp to ever exist. It's not a camp that's going to make me wildly change my win-loss prediction, but I was higher on this team than most people were. Some people are predicting this team's going to be like a 2-win team, a 3-win team. I've always been, somewhere between 6 to 9 wins, right? Is probably where this team's going to land. Maybe 10 wins if they get really good quarterback play at some point. But I think that's where they're going to land. I'm worried about the kicking situation. The secondary still has some holes in it. Quarterback's obviously a big question mark for this team, but what's around those positions, what's around those flaws I think it's good enough to at least get you 6 games at worst in the NFL. And what I've seen in camp has confirmed that to me. Like, hey, they're going to be able to do a lot more than people think. They're going to beat some teams that you wouldn't expect the Browns to beat this year, much like they've done last year, right, where they beat the Ravens randomly. This team's going to be capable, if they get certain things to align during the season, of demonstrating a lot of potential. The issue is they're just not going to have consistency at some key spots here, right? Kicking. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of consistency there. Running back, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of consistency there. Quarterback, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of consistency there. But what's going to happen over the course of the season, even if you don't have that much consistency, you're going to get a couple of games at quarterback where you get really good play. You're going to get a couple of games at kicker where you get really good play. You're going to get a couple of good games at running back where you look really good, and you're going to see the potential of the team if they could get that level of play consistently. I think that's who the Browns are. They're going to be a sneaky good team this year. Maybe not an over 500 team, but a team that nobody can really take for granted on their schedule. I think they'll build from that. And once they do get consistency at the quarterback position and some of these other key positions, then they'll be ready to be more of a real challenger. But right now, the consistency issues and concerns about quarterback are just too large for me to ignore. But overall, I feel really good about what they're building around these issues. Even like if you ask me about quarterback, I think the Browns are in a much better situation than a lot of other quarterback list teams. Like if you look at other teams in the NFL right now that don't have a quarterback that they're going to give a second contract to, and you look at the Browns, I'd rather be the Browns than most of those teams, right? I'd rather be the Browns than like the Saints. The Saints are probably the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.